Stella Blake stood outside the towering gates of the equestrian club, her worn boots crunching on the gravel path. The leather patches on her coat, stitched carefully by her own hand, told stories of years spent sewing in her cramped workshop tucked away in a rundown part of town. Today was different. After months of saving every penny and an unexpected gift from a grateful customer, she had finally booked a riding lesson at the prestigious club, the place she had passed by so many times, admiring from afar. Inside, the scent of polished leather, fresh hay, and crisp pine filled the air, a stark contrast to the dusty smells of fabric and thread she knew so well. Stella's heart thumped as she approached the gleaming stables, their shining saddles lined up like jewels. Her simple cotton bag hung awkwardly over her shoulder, and her boots, worn and patched long ago, felt heavy beneath the judging eyes of the club members arriving in tailored riding jackets. Nervousness gripped her when she stepped to the reception desk. "I'm here for the dressage lesson I booked," she said, mispronouncing the word in a soft, uncertain voice. A sharp smirk flickered across the receptionist's face. Beside her, a young attendant's voice cut through the quiet room, loud enough for others to hear. "Look at those boots. Thought you were stitching, not riding." Laughter rippled among the nearby members, some chuckling openly, others whispering behind their raised hands. Stella's cheeks flushed hot as all the polished elegance surrounding her suddenly seemed cold and unforgiving. She felt small and out of place, swallowed by the gleaming luxury that mocked her humble presence. The laughter lingered in the air long after Stella turned and hurried away from the reception desk. Some of the club members smirked knowingly, their eyes flicking toward the seamstress with a mixture of scorn and amusement. Nearby, a few exchanged quiet whispers, voices low but sharp enough to cut. "Should have dressed the part," one muttered, barely audible to Stella but loud enough to sting. Others glanced away, tucking their embarrassment beneath polite expressions, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent. Stella's heart pounded painfully. Her bag seemed heavier as her fingers gripped it tighter. Her boots, scuffed and patched as they were, felt like anchors holding her down in a place that didn't want her. She felt eyes on her back, some filled with disdain, others perhaps pity, though Stella had no appetite for sympathy. She slipped past the ornate doors and into the sunlight, her breath shallow, cheeks flushed. The chorus of quiet mockery chased her steps until she found an old wooden bench just outside the club's iron fence. It sat under a gnarled oak tree, its bark peeling in thin flakes, a small, overlooked corner amid the manicured grounds. She sat down slowly, cradling the plain cotton bag against her chest as if it could shield her from the weight of humiliation. The clatter of horses' hooves echoed faintly in the distance as expensive mounts trotted gracefully in the large paddock. Riders cloaked in navy jackets and polished boots moved with effortless ease, once distant dreams now painfully close and so very far. Stella closed her eyes, the memories rushing in unbidden. The dim light of her cramped workshop came alive behind her closed lids, the flicker of a single bulb stretched over a battered sewing machine, a spool of thread unwinding endlessly. She remembered the long nights sewing until her fingers ached, the tiny meals she skipped to stretch her pennies, and the worn cotton shirts she mended for old Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Parsons down the street. Every stitch she pulled was a small rebellion against a life that wanted less for her. A warmth rose in her chest as she recalled her grandmother's voice, the stories told under the flickering light of their modest kitchen. Her grandmother had ridden horses as a girl, weaving tales of open fields and gentle creatures beneath endless blue skies. "One day, Stella," she had said softly, "you'll ride too. You must hold on to that dream." It had seemed so far away then, like a star strewn across the sky, just out of reach. Her doctor's advice echoed in her mind, the recommendation to take up horseback riding to ease her arthritis and bring some lightness back to her aching joints. When the lesson was booked, it wasn't just a whim. It was a rare celebration, a break from the constant hum of daily hardships, a chance to feel alive in a world that had rarely been kind. The cruel mockery at the club felt like a merciless gust tearing through years of hope. Stella swallowed the bitter sting of rejection, the heavy lump of loss lodged somewhere near her throat. She thought of how tightly she had held this moment in her heart, a fragile flame against the cold dark of a life spent in quiet endurance. Memories blurred together, the endless rows of colorful fabrics, the steady rhythm of the sewing machine, the gentle encouragement of her grandmother's hands smoothing a wayward hem. The nights when fatigue crept in, threatening to drown all ambition under a sea of exhaustion, yet Stella kept pulling threads, stitching dreams into reality as best she could. But now, sitting on the rough bench, a visitor in a world that never seemed to want her, Stella felt the dreams shatter like glass beneath her fingers. The laughter played over again in her mind, loud and cruel, drowning the soft voice of hope she had so carefully nurtured. Tears came unbidden, blurring the elegant horses beyond the fence, the riders who had never known the taste of hunger or the ache of hard-fought pennies. She hugged her bag close, as if holding on to the small receipt could somehow anchor her bruised spirit. Minutes ticked by, the world moving on around her, oblivious to the quiet unraveling inside one woman's heart. Stella breathed deeply, steadying herself against the rising tide of shame and hurt. She wanted to stay, to fight back the sting, to demand respect where none was given, but her limbs felt heavy, weighed down by the day's harsh reality. The graceful horses didn't belong to her, nor the glittering world behind the clubhouse doors. For now, she was simply a seamstress in worn boots, a dreamer caught in a place that measured worth by polish and pedigree. Around her, life carried on, a young rider laughed with a trainer, a groom adjusted a saddle, and the sun moved slowly across the sky, indifferent to the small dramas unfolding below. Slowly, Stella rose from the bench, her movements tentative but determined. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and squared her shoulders. Her dream might have been wounded, but it was still there, flickering faintly beneath the rubble of rejection. With one last look at the stables and the elegant horses pacing within, she turned her back on the club and the laughter that still echoed in her ears. She walked away quietly, blending back into the rhythm of her own life, carrying with her a fragile but unbroken hope that one day, she might find a place where her boots and her heart belonged alike. Stella walked slowly along the gravel path, her boots crunching softly beneath her, the sharp edge of humiliation still prickling at her skin. She kept her eyes cast low, unwilling to meet the curious glances of club members now dispersed throughout the grounds. The iron gates behind her appeared to close softly with an indifferent clang, as if marking the end of something more than just a visit. She took a deep breath and headed toward the side of the stables, a lesser-used entrance bordered by overgrown grass and stray wooden boards. The quiet here was different, less polished, less intended for show. The scent of dirt and a faint musky odor rose from the shaded barn, mingling with the sharp aroma of hay pressed underfoot. As Stella approached, a restless movement caught her eye, a large, bay horse pacing nervously inside one of the stalls near the rear of the barn. His glossy coat shimmered despite the dim lighting, but his eyes flickered with unease. The stall's door groaned under a rusted latch that looked like it had been bending under strain for some time, barely holding the heavy wooden gate closed. She stepped closer, careful not to startle the animal. His breaths came quick and uneven, hooves shuffling the loose straw beneath him. A crackle of voices drifted from around the corner where two stable hands chatted in lowered tones. Stella's ears tuned in. "Vet's been delayed again," one groom said, his voice laced with frustration. "We're short-staffed right now, no one's covered if something goes wrong." "Just gotta hang on until the new vet starts next week," the other replied, tone resigned. "Wouldn't want to call the old one again anyway. Heard she isn't licensed anymore." Stella's brow furrowed as she exchanged a glance with the bay horse. Anxiety pricked at her chest, not just from her own wounded pride, but something deeper, a fierce protectiveness rising up in her. This animal, caught in an unsafe stall without proper care, deserved better. Gathering her courage, she approached the stable manager who was passing nearby, checking his clipboard with impatient eyes. "Excuse me," Stella called softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "I noticed the latch on that stall door. It looks broken and unsafe. And I overheard that there's no vet on site right now. That seems dangerous for the horses." The man turned slowly, his gaze scanning her patched coat and rough boots before settling on her face. A faint smirk twitched at one corner of his mouth. "You're the lady from earlier, aren't you? The seamstress who thought she could ride?" His tone held a shade of derision, but he spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. Stella swallowed hard, steadying herself. "I'm just concerned about the horse's safety. That door might give way, and without a vet here, they're at risk if something happens unexpectedly." He chuckled, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Leave the horse care to us. You stitch clothes, not handle stables." The word stung, but Stella refused to back down. From her pocket, she pulled out her phone and lifted it, focused on capturing clear photos of the restless horse and the corroded latch. The horse shifted nervously, and the stall door creaked ominously, reinforcing the urgency of her concern. "I'm going to send these to a local animal welfare group and a community journalist," Stella said, voice steady despite the tremor inside. "People should know if the club isn't providing proper care for these animals." The manager's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing more. With a final glance at the uneasy horse, Stella turned and walked away, her heartbeat racing. She felt a strange mix of fear and determination, the memory of the earlier humiliation fading beneath a resolve that surprised even her. Outside, the late afternoon sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. The same polished environment that had once seemed so forbidding now felt like a stage for something more important, an opportunity to stand for something true, beyond the judgment and sneers. As she typed out a brief, clear message to the animal rights organization, Stella described the unsafe stall, the absence of veterinary coverage, and her wish to see the horses treated with the care they deserved. She attached the photos, her fingers moving quickly despite the lingering hurt. Next, she sent a separate email to a local journalist known for highlighting community issues and injustices, explaining what she had witnessed and her concerns about the club's neglect. She pressed send, feeling a small surge of hope yet knowing that the path ahead would remain difficult. Standing there, clutching her phone, Stella looked back once more toward the stables. The horse's pacing had slowed, his breaths evening out as he leaned gently against the worn wood. It was a small moment, but to Stella it felt like the first real step toward changing something larger than herself. Turning again, she walked away with a lighter heart, ready to face whatever came next, not as just a seamstress in patched boots, but as someone who refused to be invisible. Her courage had reawakened, and this time, it was not just for a dream. It was for justice. Within days of Stella's emails being sent, a ripple began to spread far beyond the quiet streets where she toiled as a seamstress. The animal rights organization quickly shared her photographs and detailed account on their social media channels, drawing the attention of thousands. The images of the restless horse confined behind a rusted latch, coupled with Stella's calm but urgent message, struck a chord with readers. Comments poured in, some expressing outrage at the treatment of horses at such an exclusive club, others sharing stories of similar neglect and snobbery from other upscale establishments. The post went viral, swept along by people moved less by scandal and more by the courage of a woman so plainly out of place, yet so fiercely determined to speak up. Influencers with large followings reposted the images, praising Stella for standing tall despite her lowly status and modest appearance. They called her a voice for the voiceless, a reminder that dignity and compassion weren't defined by wealth or social standing. Meanwhile, local news outlets picked up the story, bringing public scrutiny to the equestrian club's practices. Reporters who visited the site reported an air of strained defensiveness among staff and management. The club hastily issued a public statement, acknowledging the concerns raised and promising swift internal reviews and improvements. Their language was careful and practiced, hedging blame onto isolated issues and emphasizing their commitment to excellence in equine care. But the public wasn't satisfied. Authorities from the city's animal welfare and licensing departments followed the mounting pressure and conducted an unscheduled inspection. Inspectors uncovered multiple safety violations, unstable stall doors, insufficient venting in barn areas, and a troubling absence of properly licensed veterinary professionals on site, confirming many of Stella's concerns. The club was slapped with fines and mandated to immediately rectify the issues or risk temporary closure. Additionally, the staff member who had mocked Stella's boots and sewing apron was suspended pending review, a rare instance of accountability in a place usually resistant to public reproach. Back in her humble workshop, Stella received an outpouring of support from her neighbors, fellow seamstresses, and the wider community. Letters, emails, and handwritten notes arrived by the day, messages filled with gratitude for her bravery, encouragement, and stories from others who had endured similar dismissive treatment in places that prized wealth over kindness. She read each one quietly in the evenings, her heart swelling with a mix of humility and strength. Several other patrons of the equestrian club, emboldened by Stella's example, came forward sharing accounts of condescension and exclusion. Their voices joined hers, weaving a tapestry of resistance that began challenging the club's elitist culture and practices. Stella's action sparked more than just regulatory change. It redefined how many saw themselves in a world that too often values appearance over integrity. Through standing up for the horse's welfare and her own dignity, she had illuminated the quiet injustice faced by many like her in the margins. In the weeks that followed, subtle yet significant changes emerged at the club. New signs appeared announcing revamped animal care policies, and official partnerships with licensed veterinary professionals were proudly displayed. The atmosphere began to shift, making space for a more inclusive environment where the humblest visitor could be treated with respect. And as Stella settled back into her seamstress work, her posture held a new grace. She folded fabric and stitched patterns with renewed purpose, aware that her courage had made a difference, not just for herself, but for a community seeking fairness and compassion. Her world, once confined to a small workshop with soft sewing threads, had expanded quietly but powerfully. In that transformation, Stella found a sense of justice reclaimed and, with it, her dignity restored. Weeks had slipped by since the uproar at the equestrian club, and Stella Blake had returned to the gentle rhythm of her life, measuring fabric, threading needles, sewing hems in her small, cluttered workshop. Her coat, still patched and plain, hung on a nearby chair, while her worn boots rested quietly beside the door. Yet there was something new in her bearing, subtle but unmistakable. She moved through her daily tasks with a quiet confidence, a strength born from standing tall when no one expected her to. The neighborhood had embraced her with warmth and pride. Friends stopped by often, chatting as she worked, their eyes bright with admiration. She had become more than the quiet seamstress mending clothes. She was a symbol of persistence and dignity. Yet Stella remained humble, her spirit tethered to the simple act of stitching life's fabric back together one seam at a time. One evening, as sunlight filtered softly through the threadbare curtains, her phone vibrated gently on the worktable. A message from the local community center blinked on the screen, an invitation to speak at an upcoming event focused on fairness and kindness. They had heard her story and wanted her to share her experience to inspire others. Stella read the message twice, a warm flush rising to her cheeks. Speaking in public had never been a comfort to her. She preferred the company of cloth and thread to an audience's gaze. But deep inside, a new voice whispered, a quiet surety that this was another step forward. She replied with a gracious acceptance, deciding that if her courage could help someone else find their own, the act would be worth it. Meanwhile, the equestrian club reached out, sending a formal apology for the earlier treatment she endured. Along with the letter came an offer of free riding lessons, a gesture meant to mend fences and perhaps even bring Stella back into their fold. She read the note carefully, appreciation mingling with resolve. After reflection, she declined politely, choosing to chart her own course rather than return to a place that had once made her feel small. A few days later, as she wandered near the club's gates, Stella noticed a new sign gleaming in the afternoon sun. It announced improved animal care policies and a newly appointed veterinary partner, visible proof of the reform sparked, in part, by her steadfast voice. She paused, allowing herself a moment to absorb the change, not just in the sign but in the knowledge that her stand had driven real action. No grand celebrations or flashy acknowledgments, just the slow, steady unfolding of justice after quiet courage. Back in her workshop, the day waned into a peaceful evening. Stella sat at her sewing machine, carefully attaching a small, colorful patch to the sleeve of a riding jacket being repaired for a neighbor. The patch, a simple emblem of a horse mid-stride, felt like a secret symbol of her journey. Her friends drifted in, their laughter mingling with the hum of the sewing machine. The warmth between them filled the room, wrapping around her like a comforting shawl. Stella looked around, her eyes resting on the familiar array of fabrics and tools, the tangible evidence of a life rebuilt stitch by stitch. In this quiet moment, she exhaled deeply, the weight of past pain lifting a fraction. She didn't have a title, a flashy job, or society's applause. But she carried something more enduring: courage. A courage that had crossed thresholds, challenged injustice, and quietly reshaped her world. And with that, Stella Blake smiled, a smile born from the simple truth that dignity belongs to those who refuse to be small, no matter the size of their boots or the softness of their voice.